Maxwell Hunter's assistant stood in his private office, carefully altering the billionaire's will with practiced precision, while a janitor watched silently from the shadows, hidden behind the half-closed door. The truth of what happened that night would remain buried for years, until one brave act of honesty shook the foundations of an empire built on deception. Morgan Blake's private office gleamed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers, their light reflecting off polished mahogany and gleaming brass fixtures. The gentle hum of the city below barely penetrated the soundproof windows of Titan Tower, the 70-story monument Morgan had built as headquarters for his technology empire. Newspapers called it the Silicon Cathedral, but to its employees it was simply the Titan Cold. Imposing and impossible to ignore. Morgan, dressed in a custom three-piece suit that cost more than most people's cars, moved between the strategic placement of awards and historical artifacts that adorned his office walls. Each item carefully selected to impress visitors, an original Apple computer signed by Jobs, moon rocks gifted by a grateful NASA after his company's satellites revolutionized space communication, and a Nobel Prize for his foundation's work on climate change technology. At 68, Morgan Blake was an institution unto himself. Once a scrappy coder from a blue-collar family, he had transformed a garage startup into Blake Tech, the world's leading artificial intelligence company. With silver hair always perfectly styled and piercing blue eyes that seemed to calculate everyone's value in milliseconds, Morgan had long since abandoned the idealism of his youth for the practical ruthlessness of a titan. 3 floors below, in a service corridor rarely visited by executives, Victor Torres cleaned silently. At 62, Victor's weathered hands had spent the last 15 years polishing floors and emptying trash cans at Titan Tower. His khaki uniform hung loosely on his frame, the name tag simply reading Victor without the military rank he once carried. With pride, Master Sergeant, United States Army, retired after 25 years of service. Victor moved with military precision through the building's service areas, his key card granting access to areas most employees never saw. The building's infrastructure, its pulse and breath, were familiar to him in ways even its architects couldn't understand. He knew every hidden corner, every security camera blind spot, and every executive's habits by heart. You need to understand how buildings breathe, Victor often told the younger janitors. This place has secrets in its walls. Most dismissed him as eccentric, but Victor's quiet observations had made him nearly invisible to the building's powerful occupants, a ghost in khaki who remembered every conversation overheard, every document glimpsed in trash cans, every late-night meeting that official calendars never recorded. Between these two men moved Elise Winters, Morgan Blake's executive assistant for the past 9 years. At 36, Elise had mastered the art of professional elegance, tailored blazers, subtle jewelry, and an expression that revealed nothing while observing everything. Her heels clicked confidently across marble floors as she navigated the labyrinth of power with practiced ease. "Coffee, Mr. Blake?" Elise placed the steaming cup on his desk, positioned precisely on the coaster as he preferred. "You're 11 o'clock. With the Senate committee has been pushed to 1:30, and your son called again about dinner this weekend." Morgan didn't look up from his screens. "Cancel dinner, tell James I'm in Singapore, and get me the latest revisions on Project Midas." Elise nodded, unfazed by his dismissal of family obligations. She had long since learned that in Morgan's world, nothing outranked business, not even his only son. "The Midas files are ready for review, and Dr. Chun is waiting for approval on the neural interface modifications." For 9 years, Elise had been Morgan's shadow and shield. She knew his passwords, his secrets, his weaknesses. She managed his schedule, his diet, his medication. When scandals threatened, she coordinated with legal before the press caught wind. When competitors approached, she vetted their offers before they reached Morgan's ears. Her fingerprints were invisible on every major decision, Her influence subtle but undeniable. What no one at Blake Tech suspected was that Elise's perfect memory cataloged far more than meeting minutes and contract clauses. She remembered every promise Morgan had broken, every whistleblower silenced, every ethical corner cut in pursuit of technological dominance. For 9 years, she had filed these memories away, never certain what purpose they might serve. That Wednesday evening, as rain pounded against the windows of Titan Tower, the usual exodus of employees had thinned to a trickle. On the executive floor, only a skeleton crew remained. Morgan in his office reviewing acquisition plans, 2 security guards at their stations, and Elise, who had told her boyfriend not to wait up. "You don't need to stay, Elise," Morgan said, glancing at his watch. "It's nearly 10. I'm just finishing the briefing for tomorrow's board meeting," she replied smoothly. "The Davies acquisition numbers need one final review." Morgan nodded absently, returning to his screens. "Has legal finalized my estate documents for tomorrow's signing? The trust revisions are complete. Your lawyer delivered them this afternoon. They're in the secure cabinet." Elise gestured toward the fingerprint-locked cabinet, where Morgan kept his most sensitive documents. "Good. I want this done before the symposium next week." Morgan rubbed his temples, the gesture revealing a rare moment of fatigue. "I'm heading to the executive lounge. Have them send up a Macallan 25. After Morgan left, Elise sat motionless at her desk, listening to his retreating footsteps. When the elevator doors closed, she moved swiftly to the secure cabinet, her fingerprint authorized as Morgan's proxy, unlocking it with a soft click. Inside lay the revised will and trust documents prepared for tomorrow's signing. 200 pages that would determine the fate of a $78 billion fortune and the future of Blake Tech's revolutionary AI systems. Elise withdrew the documents with gloved hands and placed them on her desk. From her bag, she removed an identical set of papers, perfect in every detail except for key provisions, buried in the technical language of trust disbursements and voting rights. The alterations were subtle, detectable only by those intimately familiar with Morgan's intentions. The original documents would have left majority control of Blake Tech to Morgan's son James, with significant charitable donations to veteran support organizations, a cause Morgan had championed since his brother died in combat decades ago. The revised version Elise had prepared maintained these surface elements, while inserting provisions that would gradually transfer controlling interest to a shadow board dominated by shell companies she controlled. Elise had planned this moment for 3 years. Every detail had been considered, every contingency planned for. Morgan's signature on her revised documents tomorrow would set in motion a plan that would take years to fully execute, but would ultimately redirect billions from the Blake family to accounts she controlled. She carefully transferred the legal office's preparation markings to her documents, creating perfect duplicates. The switch complete, she returned the forgeries to the secure cabinet and slipped the originals into her leather portfolio. What Elise didn't notice was Victor Torres, working late to wax the executive floor. His pass card had granted him access to the service door connecting the executive bathroom to the main office, a door partially ajar as he prepared his cleaning equipment. From his position, Victor had a clear view of Elise's careful document swap, though he couldn't discern the specific contents. Victor had served with men and women who could read intention from the slightest change in posture. He recognized deception when he saw it. The furtive movements, the gloves, the careful examination of documents above her clearance. Victor understood he was witnessing something that demanded absolute secrecy. He silently closed the service door before Elise could detect his presence, his mind racing. In his 15 years at Titan Tower, he had witnessed countless ethical compromises, but this felt different, more calculated, more personal. Victor didn't need to know the specifics to recognize that Elise Winters was betraying her employers. Trust at the most fundamental level. As Elise completed her task, slipping the original documents into her portfolio with a satisfied smile. Victor retreated down the service corridor, his cleaning cart moving silently across freshly polished floors. His weathered hands gripped the cart handle tightly, knuckles white with tension. The weight of what he'd witnessed settled heavily on shoulders already burdened by secrets. Victor had spent his life following orders and respecting chain of command. Even now, decades after leaving the military, he instinctively deferred to authority. But he also lived by a code that transcended rank and position: honesty, integrity, service. The kind of principles that seemed increasingly rare in places like Titan Tower. Back in his small basement office, little more than a converted storage closet, Victor sat heavily in his chair. Photos of his military unit and his late wife adorned the concrete walls alongside his service medals. His gnarled fingers traced the outline of his wife's face in their wedding photo, seeking guidance from her memory. "What would you do, Maria?" he whispered to the empty room. "What's the right move here?" The janitor's dilemma was profound. Speaking up meant risking his job, the position that provided his modest apartment, and the medical benefits that covered his diabetes medication. Staying silent meant becoming complicit in whatever deception Elise had orchestrated. Victor's thoughts turned to Morgan Blake. The billionaire had never spoken directly to Victor in 15 years, probably didn't know his name despite passing him in hallways hundreds of times. Yet Victor knew Morgan had donated millions to veteran causes, had established scholarships for children of fallen soldiers. Did that earn the man Victor's loyalty? Or was Victor's obligation simply to the truth, regardless of consequence? As rain continued to lash against the small basement window, Victor Torres made his decision. He carefully locked away his cleaning supplies, straightened his khaki uniform, and headed toward the executive elevator banks. Whatever came next, he would face it with the same courage that had carried him through war zones and personal tragedy. What Victor couldn't possibly know was how his simple act of honesty would soon collide with decades of accumulated power, privilege, and deception, setting in motion events that would forever alter the legacies of everyone involved. Morning sunlight streamed through the penthouse windows of Morgan Blake's Central Park apartment as he reviewed quarterly projections on his tablet. His breakfast, a precisely measured portion of steel-cut oats, berries, and a protein shake, sat untouched as he scrolled through data visualizations. Morgan had built his empire on the principle that information was power, and he consumed it with the same disciplined approach he applied to nutrition. A notification flashed on his screen, another message from James, his son. Morgan hesitated before opening it, already anticipating the familiar mixture of disappointment and accusation. At 32, James Blake remained an enigma to his father, passionate about environmental causes and social justice, seemingly allergic to the corporate world Morgan had built for him to inherit. Their relationship had deteriorated since Margaret's death from cancer 7 years ago. She had been the bridge between father and son, translating their fundamentally different languages to each other. "Dad," the message read, "I know you're in Singapore, but when you decide to rejoin reality, we need to talk about the Veteran Housing Initiative. Your foundation is blocking funding for reasons that make no sense. These are the same veterans you claim to support in every press release." Morgan closed the message without responding. James didn't understand the complexities of corporate philanthropy, how charitable giving needed to align with shareholder expectations and brand positioning. The boy lived in a world of moral absolutes that business simply couldn't accommodate. Across town, in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Queens, Victor Torres sat at his kitchen table staring at pill bottles and medical bills. His military pension combined with his janitor's salary covered his basic expenses, but the specialized medication for his diabetic neuropathy remained a constant struggle. The VA covered some costs, but the bureaucratic battles consumed energy he increasingly couldn't spare. Victor's walls told the story of a life, dedicated to service photographs of his army unit in Desert Storm, his late wife Maria in her nurse's uniform, their daughter Sophia at her college graduation. Sophia now lived in California with Victor's 2 grandchildren, sending video calls and photos that brightened his otherwise solitary existence. He hadn't slept well after witnessing Elise's document swap. His military training had taught him to trust his instincts, and everything about her actions screamed deception. The question wasn't whether to act, but how. Direct confrontation with Elise seemed foolish. She operated in a world of corporate power he barely understood. Going to security risked dismissal without evidence. That left approaching Morgan Blake himself, a man who probably didn't know Victor existed. Victor placed his pills in a weekly organizer with practiced precision, his mind working through tactical scenarios, as he had done in combat zones decades earlier. Timing would be critical, so would approach. The morning signing was scheduled for 9:30, according to the calendar he'd glimpsed while emptying Morgan's trash yesterday. He needed to intercept Blake before then, in a moment private enough for a real conversation. Meanwhile, in her sleek downtown apartment, Elise Winters prepared for the day with methodical efficiency. Her closet contained a carefully curated selection of designer suits and neutral tones armor for the corporate battlefield. Today she selected a charcoal gray ensemble with subtle red accents, authoritative yet understated, perfect for a day when attention should remain on Morgan rather than herself. As she applied her makeup, Elise's thoughts drifted to what had brought her to this moment. Growing up in foster care had taught her early lessons about power and vulnerability. Intelligence had been her escape route: scholarships to prestigious schools, internships secured through relentless networking, and finally, the coveted position beside one of the world's most powerful men. For 5 years, she had been the perfect assistant, anticipating needs, solving problems, protecting Morgan from distractions. She had expected recognition, advancement, perhaps even mentorship. Instead, she found herself trapped in the role of enabler, watching as Morgan promoted less competent men who had attended the right schools or knew the right people. The turning point came during the Horizon Project, an AI initiative she had helped conceptualize. When the patents were filed, her name appeared nowhere. When Fortune magazine covered the breakthrough, Morgan spoke of "my vision" without acknowledging her contributions. She had confronted him privately, professional but direct. "You're my assistant, Elise," he had said, barely glancing up from his screens. "You're compensated very well for implementing my ideas. If you want credit, perhaps corporate life isn't for you." That night, examining her contract with its restrictive clauses and non-competes, Elise realized the truth: Morgan Blake would never see her as more than a tool. Her knowledge, her creativity, her dedication would enrich him while she remained locked in a gilded cage of confidentiality, agreements and loyalty oaths. The will modification wasn't just about money, it was about reclaiming what she'd earned. The provisions she'd inserted would gradually transfer control of key patents to subsidiaries where she held hidden interest. The changes would take years to fully implement, carefully disguised as philanthropic restructuring and governance evolution. By the time anyone realized what had happened, she would be insulated by layers of legal protection. Elise checked her reflection one final time, satisfaction warming her chest. Today would set everything in motion. After 9 years of invisibility, she was finally writing herself into the story. Back at Titan Tower, Morgan Blake arrived at his usual time, 7:15 a.m. precisely. The security team nodded respectfully as he entered, his biometric signature automatically summoning his private elevator. The building hummed with pre-workday preparations, cleaning crews finishing overnight tasks, kitchen staff preparing executive breakfast options, security conducting shift changes. Victor had arrived at 5:30 a.m., earlier than his scheduled shift. He had spent 20 years mastering the art of being precisely where he needed to be in military operations, and today required similar tactical planning. He knew Morgan's routines: the private elevator to the executive floor, the morning ritual of coffee while reviewing overnight developments from Asian markets, the brief window before Elise arrived when Morgan would be relatively alone. At 7:20 a.m., Victor positioned himself near the executive kitchen, normally off-limits to cleaning staff during morning hours. He had brought a maintenance request form. As pretext, a minor issue with the executive bathroom sink that required immediate attention. The kitchen staff, accustomed to Victor's quiet competence, barely glanced at him as he waited near the service corridor. At 7:32 a.m., Morgan emerged from his office and walked toward the kitchen, his attention focused on his tablet. Victor straightened, his uniform heart-pounding as it had before combat operations. This moment would require perfect timing and unshakable courage. "Mr. Blake," Victor said, stepping forward as Morgan reached for his coffee. "I need to speak with you privately. It's urgent." Morgan looked up, momentarily startled by the interruption to his routine. His eyes narrowed as he assessed the janitor. Before him, an older man in a khaki uniform, standing with military posture, expression serious, but not threatening. "Maintenance requests go through facilities management," Morgan replied dismissively, reaching past Victor for his coffee. "Sir, this isn't about maintenance," Victor said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's about your will and the documents being signed today. Your assistant made unauthorized changes last night." Morgan froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. His keen eyes, the same ones that had assessed thousands of business proposals and technological innovations, now focused fully on Victor's face, searching for deception or ulterior motive. "That's a serious accusation," Morgan said, voice lowered. "Who are you exactly?" "Victor Torres, sir. Master Sergeant, U.S. Army, retired. I've worked maintenance here for 15 years. Morgan set down his coffee, the familiar confidence of his boardroom persona reasserting itself. "And you expect me to believe that my executive assistant is tampering with legal documents based on what evidence exactly?" "I saw her last night, sir," Victor replied steadily. "After you left your office around 10 p.m., she opened your secure cabinet with gloves on, switched your will documents with different ones. I was cleaning the executive bathroom when it happened." A flicker of doubt crossed Morgan's face. Victor recognized it immediately, the split-second calculation of risk and probability that commanders made under pressure. Morgan glanced at his watch, then toward the elevator banks where Elise would arrive any minute. "Follow me," Morgan said abruptly, turning toward his private office. As they walked, Victor felt the weight of what he'd initiated. 15 years of invisible service were suddenly visible. The consequences would reshape his carefully balanced life, regardless of the outcome. But the military had taught him that sometimes standing your ground was its own victory, regardless of the battle's outcome. Neither man noticed Elise stepping off the elevator at the far end of the hall, her practiced smile freezing as she saw the janitor following Morgan Blake into his private office. Her portfolio containing the original will. Documents suddenly felt heavy in her hands as the door closed behind them. Morgan's private office felt different in the early morning light, less imposing, more vulnerable somehow. Victor stood at parade rest, a habitual posture from decades of military service, as Morgan circled his desk and activated the security protocols. A soft electronic hum indicated that recording systems were active and the room was secure from electronic surveillance. "Explain exactly what you saw," Morgan commanded, his tone measured but intense. "Every detail." Victor recounted the events with precision: Elise's late-night activities, the document swap, her careful handling of papers with gloved hands. He described how she had meticulously transferred markings from one set of documents to another, creating perfect duplicates that would fool casual inspection. "I couldn't see the specific contents," Victor concluded, "but I've witnessed enough covert operations to recognize deception when I see it." Morgan's expression remained unreadable, but his fingers drummed a rapid pattern on his desk, the only external sign of his internal calculations. "Why are you telling me this? What do you want?" The question hung in the air between them, billionaire and janitor. Power and service, separated by worlds of experience yet connected in this moment by an unexpected thread of truth. "Nothing, sir," Victor replied, his weathered face dignified. "In its simplicity, I've spent my life following the code. Doesn't matter if you're a private or a general, integrity isn't negotiable." Morgan studied him silently, searching for the hidden angle, the leverage play, the self-interest that in his experience motivated all human actions. Finding none, he pressed a button on his desk console. "Security, this is Blake. I need immediate access to last night's surveillance footage from my office between 9 p.m. and midnight. Route it to my private screen only." He paused. "And locate Ms. Winters. Tell her I need coffee in my office immediately." Victor remained motionless as Morgan navigated through security footage on his monitor, the screen angled away from Victor's view. For several minutes, the only sound was Morgan's occasional tap on the screen, advancing through time codes. "Interesting," Morgan finally murmured, more to himself than to Victor. "She disabled the main office cameras for 17 minutes, logged as system maintenance in the security protocols." He looked up at Victor. "But she wouldn't have known about the secondary system I had installed after the industrial espionage attempt last year." He turned the screen, showing Victor the footage, a high-angle view capturing Elise at the secure cabinet, methodically switching documents while wearing thin leather gloves. The image quality was exceptional, showing even the careful way she transferred tab markers from one document set to another. "You were telling the truth," Morgan said, surprise evident in his voice. "But this doesn't prove the documents were altered, only switched." A gentle knock interrupted them. Elise entered carrying Morgan's preferred morning coffee, Ethiopian blend, black, in the handcrafted ceramic mug he favored. Her smile faltered slightly upon seeing Victor still present, but she recovered instantly. "Good morning, Mr. Blake," she said smoothly, placing the coffee precisely on its designated coaster. "I've arranged for the legal team to arrive at 9:15 for the signing. Senator Harrison called to confirm your lunch appointment, and thank you, Elise." Morgan interrupted, his tone deceptively casual. "Before we get to today's schedule, I have a question about those estate documents we discussed yesterday." Victor observed the micro-expressions flickering across Elise's face, professional interest giving way to momentary wariness before settling into practiced neutrality. 9 years at Morgan's side had taught her to control her reactions, but Victor had interrogated enemy combatants whose lives depended on concealing information. He recognized the subtle tells, the slight tension around her eyes, the barely perceptible shift in her breathing pattern. "Of course," Elise replied. "The documents are ready for signing as requested." Morgan leaned back in his chair, adopting the relaxed posture he used when setting traps in negotiation. "Remind me about the Veteran Foundation provisions." "Those were important to me," Elise nodded confidently. "The Blake Veterans Foundation receives the specified 20% of your estate, with the expanded housing initiative as the priority program, just as you outlined." Morgan's expression remained pleasant, but his eyes sharpened. "And the voting control provisions for Blake Tech? Those were quite complex. Majority control transfers to James through the family trust, with the governance structure we discussed," Elise replied without hesitation. "The non-voting shares distribute to the other beneficiaries, including the charitable trusts." Victor maintained his still posture, but he registered the calculated performance unfolding before him. Morgan was testing Elise, comparing her responses against what he knew, or suspected. Elise was confidently reciting provisions that matched what Morgan expected to hear, not what she had actually prepared. "I see," Morgan said, picking up his coffee cup and taking a deliberate sip. "And what about the subsidiary patent control mechanisms? Refresh my memory on those details. A fleeting shadow crossed Elise's features, so brief that someone less observant might have missed it. This question ventured into territory she hadn't anticipated, potentially exposing discrepancies between the original documents and her substitutes. The standard protections remain in place, she answered, her voice maintaining its professional cadence though slightly accelerated. All intellectual property remains under parent company control with the licensing structures unchanged. Morgan set down his coffee cup with deliberate precision. That's strange, because I specifically amended those provisions last week. The changes should be reflected in the final documents. The trap was sprung. Elise's composure wavered for only a moment, but it was enough. Morgan's eyes hardened as he reached into his desk drawer and removed a small recorder. Elise, are you familiar with Victor Kaminsky? The non sequitur momentarily confused both Elise and Victor. Your competitor from Quantum Solutions? Elise replied cautiously. We've monitored their patent filings as you requested. Morgan pressed play on the recorder. Elise's voice emerged, clear and businesslike. The modifications are complete. Once he signs tomorrow, control of the key patents will transfer gradually through the shell companies we established. Blake won't realize until it's too late. A male voice with a slight Eastern European accent responded. Excellent work, Ms. Winters. Quantum Solutions values your assistance. The final payment will be transferred as discussed. Color drained from Elise's face as the recording continued, detailing her systematic betrayal, not just the will modification, but years of industrial espionage, sharing Blake Tech's developments with its chief competitor. Corporate security has been tracking suspicious information leaks for 14 months, Morgan said, his voice dangerously quiet. They identified you 6 weeks ago. Every communication since has been monitored. I needed to understand the full scope of your betrayal. Elise's professional mask shattered completely. You built your fortune on other people's ideas, she hissed, abandoning pretense. You took my work on Project Horizon, claimed it as your own innovation. I deserved recognition partnership. So you sold company secrets to our competitors and attempted to hijack my estate? Morgan's voice remained controlled, but fury radiated from him. Your contributions were valuable, Elise, but they were made as an employee under contract. That's how business works. That's how exploitation works, Elise countered, desperation edging into her voice. Your son understands, James saw how you used people. Why do you think he refuses to join the company? He knows what you really are. Morgan flinched almost imperceptibly at the mention of his son, a vulnerability Victor hadn't expected to witness. For a moment, the billionaire's carefully constructed persona cracked, revealing something raw and unguarded beneath. The standoff was interrupted as 2 security officers entered the office, responding to a silent alert Morgan had triggered. Ms. Winters needs to be escorted from the building, Morgan instructed them. Her access is terminated effective immediately. Corporate security will meet you in the lobby. As the guards approached, Elise straightened her shoulders, dignified even. In defeat, you need me, Morgan. Nobody knows your operation like I do. That was your leverage, Morgan replied coldly. And you squandered it for personal gain. The security officers flanked Elise, waiting for her to move toward the door. Victor watched her transformation from confident executive to cornered adversary with a soldier's detachment. He had seen many powerful people fall, had learned that rank and status offered no protection against the consequences of one's choices. As Elise was led away, she paused at the threshold, looking back. Not at Morgan, but at Victor. Her expression contained no anger, only a strange, almost respectful acknowledgement before she disappeared down the hallway. Silence settled over the office. Morgan turned to Victor, seeing him as if for the first time, not as invisible maintenance staff, but as the man whose integrity had exposed a complex betrayal. Master Sergeant Torres, Morgan said quietly. It seems I owe you my gratitude. The sudden vacuum created by Elise's departure left Morgan's office unnaturally quiet. Security teams were conducting a forensic sweep of her workstation and devices. Legal teams were being assembled to assess damages, and emergency protocols for potential intellectual property compromises had been activated. Through it all, Victor remained standing, awaiting dismissal to return to his regular duties. Morgan activated his desk console. Cancel the will signing. Tell legal I need a complete review of all documents Elise handled in the past 6 months. He paused, glancing at Victor. And tell HR to send someone from senior management to my office immediately. With immediate threats contained, Morgan finally focused his full attention on the janitor who had shattered his morning routine and possibly saved his legacy. You could have ignored what you saw, Morgan observed. Most people would have. Safer. That way, Victor's weathered face remained impassive. Not how I'm built, sir. Morgan nodded slowly, studying the man before him with newfound curiosity. The billionaire had built his fortune by accurately assessing people's motivations and capabilities within minutes. Yet somehow, he had completely misjudged both Elise and this unassuming janitor, an error of judgment that challenged his fundamental understanding of human nature. Sit down, Master Sergeant. Morgan gestured toward the chair across from his desk, a seat usually reserved for executives and dignitaries. Tell me about your military service. Victor hesitated briefly before accepting the offered chair. 25 years, sir. Started as infantry, moved to intelligence operations during Desert Storm. Finished my career training special operations units in advanced infiltration techniques. And now you clean floors at Titan Tower, Morgan stated, not as judgment, but as a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. Victor met his gaze steadily. Honest work that lets me help my daughter with her college loans and covers my medical needs. Not everyone transitions easily to civilian life. Before Morgan could respond, a sharp knock interrupted them. Melissa Chun, Blake Tech's Senior Vice President of Operations, entered with a tablet in hand, clearly summoned in response to Morgan's HR request. Her eyes widened slightly at finding the CEO in private conversation with a maintenance worker. You wanted to see someone from senior management? She asked, professional but obviously confused. Yes, Morgan confirmed. This is Master Sergeant Victor Torres. As of today, he's our new Director of Physical Security Operations, reporting directly to me. Victor's careful composure cracked for the first time, surprise evident in his expression. Melissa looked equally stunned, but recovered quickly. I'll need to create the position in our system, she said, fingers already working on her tablet. Salary range? Executive Band C, full benefits package, immediate effect, Morgan replied without hesitation. And I want a complete security. Credentials review and background check expedited. That won't be necessary, Victor interrupted, his voice quiet but firm. I appreciate the gesture, Mr. Blake, but I'm not qualified for an executive position. Morgan's eyebrows rose slightly. Few people declined his direct offers. You have 25 years of military intelligence and security experience. You noticed a sophisticated corporate espionage operation that my entire security team missed. I'd say you're exceptionally qualified. With respect, sir, that's not how this works, Victor replied. Executive positions require different skills, management experience, technology knowledge, corporate politics. Promoting me would undermine your leadership team's confidence. Melissa watched this exchange with barely concealed astonishment. In Blake Tech's hierarchy, maintenance staff didn't decline promotions from the CEO or lecture him on organizational dynamics. Morgan studied Victor with renewed interest. What would you suggest instead? Keep me where I'm effective, Victor answered simply. But perhaps consider addressing why your janitor was the one who caught this breach, not your security systems or personnel. The blunt assessment hung in the air for a moment before Morgan nodded thoughtfully. Fair point. Melissa, please give us the room. And keep this morning's events confidential until further notice. After she departed, Morgan rose from his desk and walked to the window, gazing out at the Manhattan skyline. For the first time in years, uncertainty had breached his carefully controlled world. Elise's betrayal represented not just a security threat but a fundamental failure of judgment. He had trusted her completely, relied on her discretion and loyalty, never questioning her growing influence over his affairs. "You have coffee with your security teams?" Victor asked suddenly. Morgan turned, puzzled by the non sequitur. "Excuse me?" "In the military, good commanders make time for the people who protect them," Victor explained. "You drink coffee with your executives, your lawyers, your investors. But do you ever sit with the people who guard your building, monitor your systems, protect your interests while you sleep?" The question struck Morgan with unexpected force. In 20 years of building Blake Tech, he had never once attended a security team briefing or learned the names of those who protected his company's physical and digital assets. They were infrastructure necessary but invisible, like the electrical systems or plumbing. "No," Morgan admitted, the single syllable unexpectedly difficult. "I delegate those relationships to department heads." Victor nodded, neither surprised nor judgmental. "The most valuable intelligence comes from people who see everything, but are treated like they're invisible. Your assistant betrayed you because she felt unseen. Your security team failed because they're disconnected from your priorities." Morgan returned to his desk, tapping his fingers thoughtfully on its polished surface. "You've given this some thought. 15 years watching this company operate," Victor replied with a slight shrug. "Plenty of time to observe patterns." A notification flashed on Morgan's screen, a reminder of his 9 a.m. executive committee meeting where 12 division heads would be waiting for his strategic guidance. For perhaps the first time in his career, the prospect of another PowerPoint presentation and status update felt hollow compared to the raw truth being offered by the man across from him. That Morgan made a decision. "I'd like to continue this conversation, but I have commitments this morning. Are you available this afternoon?" Victor glanced at his watch, the practical concerns of his position reasserting themselves. "My shift ends at 4 o'clock and I have a medical appointment at the VA at 5:30. "Medical appointment?" Morgan inquired, suddenly curious about the details of a life so different from his own. "Diabetic neuropathy," Victor explained matter-of-factly. "Service-connected condition. The VA handles most of it, but some treatments aren't fully covered." Morgan nodded, making a mental note. "Would you be willing to meet me at 4:30? My driver can take you to your appointment afterward." Victor considered the offer, then nodded his agreement. "Where should I report, sir?" "The executive lounge on the 67th floor," Morgan replied. "And Victor, thank you. Not just for this morning, but for 15 years of service I failed to notice." As Victor rose to leave, his posture still military straight despite the years and health challenges, Morgan found himself wondering about the man's life beyond Titan Tower, his family, his struggles, his perspective shaped by experiences so different from the corporate battlefields Morgan had mastered. When the door closed behind Victor, Morgan remained seated, the morning's executive committee agenda forgotten. For the first time in decades, he felt something shifting inside him, the uncomfortable recognition that he had built an empire while remaining blind to the human foundation supporting it. He picked up his phone and made an unprecedented call to his executive assistant's replacement. "Cancel my meetings through lunch and get me the personnel files for all security and maintenance staff who've been with the company more than 5 years." He paused. "And find out everything you can about veteran healthcare challenges, particularly regarding diabetic neuropathy treatments." As he hung up, Morgan glanced at the family photo on his desk. Himself, Margaret, and a teenage James taken on their last vacation before her diagnosis. His late wife would have noticed Victor years ago, would have known his story, probably would have invited him to dinner. The realization brought a sharp pang of something Morgan rarely allowed himself to feel regret. The 67th floor executive lounge at Titan Tower offered panoramic views of Manhattan through floor-to-ceiling windows, normally reserved for board meetings and entertaining high-value clients. The space featured leather seating arrangements, a fully stocked bar, and museum-quality artwork. At 4:25 p.m., the lounge stood empty except for Morgan Blake, who had dismissed the usual attendants to ensure privacy. Morgan had spent the afternoon in an unusual manner for the famously forward-focused CEO looking backward. The personnel files he'd requested revealed Victor Torres had been employed at Blake Tech for exactly 15 years and 7 months. His performance reviews consistently rated exceptional for reliability and thoroughness, yet his salary had increased only marginally. Despite his perfect attendance record and willingness to work difficult shifts. More surprisingly, Victor had twice declined promotions to supervisory positions, preferring to remain in direct service roles. The medical information Morgan had requested painted a concerning picture of veteran healthcare challenges. Diabetic neuropathy treatments beyond basic pain management often fell into coverage gaps between VA benefits and standard insurance. The more advanced treatments, nerve stimulation therapy, specialized medications, comprehensive pain management programs, required either exceptional insurance or significant out-of-pocket expenses. Victor entered precisely at 4:30. Morgan noticed details he had overlooked that morning: the slight stiffness in the older man's gait, the careful way he managed his movements to minimize pain, the weathered wedding band he still wore despite references to a late wife. "Please sit down," Morgan gestured to the chair across from him. "Would you like something to drink?" Victor hesitated before settling on a simple, "Water, thank you." Morgan poured 2 glasses from a crystal carafe, sliding one across the table. Before taking a seat himself, the billionaire had removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie. Small concessions to informality that felt significant in the context of his typically rigorous presentation. "I've been reviewing your employment records," Morgan began, observing how Victor's expression remained neutral at this potential invasion of privacy. 15 years of exceptional service, yet you've twice declined advancement opportunities. May I ask why?" Victor took a measured sip of water before responding. "Supervisory roles would mean less direct work and more meetings. I've had enough meetings for one lifetime in the military. I prefer tangible results, seeing a floor polished, a problem fixed." Morgan nodded, understanding the sentiment more than Victor might expect. His own career had evolved from hands-on coding to endless strategic discussions that often felt removed from concrete outcomes. "Your military record is impressive," Morgan continued. "Special operations training, high level, security clearance, commendations for service in multiple conflict zones. With those qualifications, you could have pursued more lucrative security consulting work after retirement." Victor's weathered hands cradled the water glass, his eyes briefly distant with memories. "I tried that path initially. The private security sector values certain military experiences, tactical training, weapons proficiency, threat assessment. But I found the ethics flexible. Too many firms prioritize client demands over proper protocols. So you chose to become a janitor instead?" Morgan asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "I chose honest work that lets me sleep at night," Victor corrected without defensiveness. "My wife Maria was still alive then, fighting breast cancer. We needed stability, healthcare coverage. Blake Tech offered both." Morgan absorbed this information, mentally calculating that Victor's wife must have passed away during his employment at the company, a significant life event that had occurred without notice or acknowledgement from leadership. "I'm sorry about your wife," Morgan said quietly. I lost my Margaret to cancer as well, 7 years ago. Victor nodded, a moment of unexpected connection passing between them. Maria fought for 3 years. Passed in my 11th year here. Your HR department sent a standard condolence card. Ms. Winters signed it for you. The subtle indictment wasn't lost on Morgan. He had never reviewed the company's bereavement protocols, had signed over that responsibility to HR, and trusted Elise to manage appropriate responses. How many losses, celebrations, and life milestones had occurred among his employees without his awareness? I should have known, Morgan acknowledged. I should have signed that card myself. Victor shrugged slightly. You employ thousands of people, Mr. Blake. No one expected personal attention. But perhaps they should, Morgan replied, surprising himself with the sentiment. I built this company on the principle that details matter in code, in contracts, in product design. Yet I've overlooked the most important details of all, the people who make everything possible. The conversation paused as both men looked out at the golden afternoon light bathing the city. From this height, the endless movement below seemed orchestrated and purposeful, thousands of lives intersecting in patterns too complex to fully comprehend. You mentioned medical appointments earlier, Morgan said, redirecting the conversation. The VA doesn't fully cover your treatment needs? If Victor was surprised by the personal question, he didn't show it. The standard treatments are covered. The more effective ones require supplemental insurance or private payment. I manage. But you shouldn't have to just manage after 25 years of military service, Morgan replied, an edge entering his voice. Especially not while working for a company with my resources. Victor's expression remained composed, but his eyes sharpened. I don't want charity, Mr. Blake. Not charity correction, Morgan countered. My Veterans Foundation donates millions annually to support services. Yet I've had an employee, a decorated veteran struggling with medical coverage, under my own roof. He leaned forward slightly. That represents a fundamental failure in how we're approaching the problem. The door opened unexpectedly, and James Blake entered the lounge, stopping short at the sight of his father in conversation with someone in a maintenance uniform. At 32, James resembled a younger version of Morgan, though his casual attire and longer hair reflected his deliberate distance from corporate aesthetics. Dad, James looked between the two men, confusion evident. Reception said I'd find you here. I can come back. No, stay, Morgan gestured to an empty chair. James, this is Master Sergeant Victor Torres. He's been with Blake Tech for 15 years and potentially saved our company from a significant security breach this morning. James extended his hand to Victor, his handshake firm and direct. It's an honor to meet you, Master Sergeant. Thank you for your service, both military and apparently to our family company. Victor nodded, assessing the younger Blake with quiet interest. Your father speaks highly of you. James shot a surprised glance at Morgan, their strained relationship making such commendation unexpected. That's not usually our dynamic. An awkward silence threatened before Morgan addressed his son directly. Victor was just helping me understand some of the gaps in veteran healthcare coverage, particularly for service-connected conditions like diabetic neuropathy. James's expression shifted from confusion to engaged interest. Healthcare access being one of his passionate causes. The system is fundamentally broken. The VA is underfunded, bureaucratically nightmarish, and struggles with outdated technology. Private insurers carve out exclusions for service-connected conditions, creating coverage gaps no one takes responsibility for. Victor nodded in agreement. Most veterans learn to navigate between systems, fighting for coverage case by case. Many just give up, which is precisely why I've been trying to get the foundation to focus on direct healthcare subsidies rather than building more monuments. James added, directing this point toward his father with the familiar tension of an ongoing disagreement. Morgan absorbed his son's criticism without his usual defensive response. The day's events had created microscopic cracks in his certainty enough to allow new perspectives to seep through. "You may have been right about that," he acknowledged quietly. James blinked in surprise at this unprecedented concession, then looked more carefully between his father and Victor. Something significant had clearly happened, something that had momentarily disrupted Morgan Blake's ironclad convictions. "I should leave you two to talk," Victor said, glancing at his watch. "My appointment. My driver is waiting downstairs," Morgan interrupted. "He'll take you to the VA and wait to bring you home afterward." He extended his hand. "Thank you, Victor, for everything today. We'll continue this conversation soon." After Victor departed, James studied his father with undisguised curiosity. Who exactly is that man, and what has he done with Morgan Blake? "I haven't seen you willingly listen to anyone's perspective since Mom died." Morgan turned to the windows, watching Victor's reflection disappear into the elevator. "He reminded me of something I forgot somewhere along the way, that systems are only as good as the people within them, and that leadership means seeing those people clearly." For the first time in years, father and son shared a moment of genuine connection, both recognizing that something fundamental had shifted in the carefully maintained distance between them. The Blake Foundation's headquarters occupied the entire 40th floor of Titan Tower, its sleek design showcasing the philanthropic arm of Morgan's empire. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Central Park, while digital displays highlighted ongoing charitable initiatives, disaster relief in developing nations, STEM education programs, and the Blake Veterans Memorial under construction in Washington, D.C. 3 days after the security breach, Morgan stood before these displays with fresh eyes, James beside him. The Foundation's executive director, Patricia Winters, delivered her quarterly presentation with practiced confidence, unaware of the quiet revolution happening in Morgan's thinking. "Construction on the memorial remains on schedule," Patricia concluded, gesturing toward architectural renderings. "The bronze sculptures have received preliminary approval from the National Park Service, and the interactive digital elements will feature profiles of distinguished service members throughout American history." "How many actual veterans will this memorial help?" Morgan interrupted, his question cutting through the polished presentation. Patricia faltered momentarily. "Well, it will honor their service and I understand its symbolic value," Morgan pressed. "But what tangible benefits will it provide to veterans struggling with healthcare gaps, housing insecurity, or employment challenges?" James shot his father a surprised glance. These were precisely the questions he had been asking for years, typically dismissed as impractical idealism by both Morgan and the Foundation leadership. Patricia adjusted her approach, recognizing unfamiliar terrain. "The memorial includes an information center where veterans can learn about available services, and the digital installations will raise awareness about veteran issues." "Cancel it," Morgan said flatly. The room fell silent. Patricia's professional composure cracked. "I'm sorry?" "Redirect the $47 million allocated for the memorial," Morgan clarified. "James will work with you to develop direct service programs addressing healthcare gaps for veterans with service-connected conditions." James straightened in his chair, stunned by both the decision and his unexpected inclusion. "Dad, are you serious?" Morgan turned to his son, his expression resolute. "You've been right about this all along. Monuments don't solve problems, they just make donors feel good about not solving them." Patricia's fingers tightened around her tablet. "Mr. Blake, the memorial has been in development for 3 years. Contracts have been signed. Announcements have been made. Your name is literally carved into the foundation stone." "Then my name will be on something more meaningful than stone," Morgan replied. "Draft a press release explaining the redirection of funds toward direct veteran services. Frame it as an evolution of our commitment, not a reversal." As Patricia and her team filed out in stunned silence, James remained behind, studying his father with newfound curiosity. This is about that janitor, isn't it? Victor? Morgan moved to the window, gazing down at the tiny figures moving through the park below, partly. But it's also about what your mother would have wanted. Margaret always said our foundation should prioritize impact over recognition. Mom would be shocked to hear you finally agreeing with her, James said, a slight smile softening the observation. Though probably not as shocked as I am. Morgan turned to face his son directly. I've spent 20 years building systems so efficient they could operate without human intervention. But I'm realizing that approach has cost me more than it's gained. Like your relationship with your only son, James suggested, the question direct but without its usual bitterness. Like my relationship with everyone, Morgan acknowledged, the admission clearly difficult. Starting with you. The moment stretched between them fragile, uncertain, but more honest than any conversation they'd shared since Margaret's death. James finally broke the silence. So what happens now? I'd like you to lead the Foundation's reorganization, Morgan said. You understand the needs better than I do, and you've been studying these issues while I've been ignoring them. James hesitated, suspicion warring with hope. You'd give me that kind of control? After years of dismissing my naive idealism? I'm trying to learn from my mistakes, Morgan replied simply. Will you help me? Across town, Victor Torres sat in his small apartment, reviewing the documents that had arrived by courier that morning. The packet contained comprehensive medical insurance coverage, a platinum level policy that would cover his treatments without the limitations of his current plan. Accompanying the insurance documents was a letter on Morgan Blake's personal stationery. Victor, this policy represents not charity, but correction of an oversight. All Blake Tech veterans with service-connected conditions will receive similar coverage enhancements effective immediately. You simply received yours first as the catalyst for this necessary change. Additionally, I would value your perspective on our security protocols if you're willing to serve as a consultant. This role would accommodate your current position and medical needs while compensating you appropriately for your expertise. My driver will be available should you wish to discuss this further. With respect and gratitude, Morgan Blake. Victor placed the letter on his kitchen table beside framed photographs of his late wife and his daughter's family. The insurance documents represented more than healthcare coverage. They symbolized recognition of value beyond function, dignity beyond utility. His ringing phone interrupted his thoughts. The caller ID displayed Sofia Torres, his daughter. Calling from California, Dad? Sofia's voice carried both excitement and confusion. Did you save a billionaire's life or something? I just got a call from Stanford Medical Center saying my student loans have been paid in full. The woman mentioned something about the Blake Foundation Veteran Family Education Program. Victor's hand tightened around the phone. That wasn't my doing, Sofia. Well, somebody with a lot of money thinks pretty highly of you, she replied. The foundation representative said the program is new, supporting education for veterans family members to reduce financial strain on service-connected households. Victor glanced again at Morgan's letter, understanding the implication. This wasn't just about his situation, but about systemic change, the kind of multiplied impact that could transform thousands of lives. The following morning, Victor arrived for his shift at Titan Tower to find the security protocols already changing. The lobby security team, typically isolated in their monitoring station, now conducted a daily briefing with representatives from each department. Maintenance staff, previously invisible background fixtures, were actively included in security awareness training. As Victor collected his equipment from the maintenance office, he received a text message from an unfamiliar number. Executive Lounge, 9 a.m. if convenient. Coffee this time. MB at precisely 9 a.m. Victor stepped off the elevator to find both Morgan and James Blake seated in the executive lounge, casual Friday attire replacing their usual formal business wear. Victor, Morgan rose to greet him. Thank you for coming. James and I were hoping you might share your perspective on some foundation initiatives we're developing. Victor glanced between father and son, noting the diminished tension in their body language. I'm not sure what insight I could offer that would be valuable to the Blake Foundation. James leaned forward, his expression earnest. We're completely restructuring our veterans programs based on direct feedback from those who've navigated the system. Your experience would be invaluable in helping us identify the gaps most in need of addressing. Morgan gestured to the chair across from them. We're not asking for your maintenance expertise, Victor. We're asking for your life expertise. Victor hesitated only briefly before taking the offered seat, recognizing that something fundamental had shifted in the Blake family dynamic and perhaps in his own life as well. As the conversation unfolded, three men from vastly different worlds found unexpected common ground in the simple, powerful act of truly seeing one another. 6 weeks after the security breach, Titan Tower buzzed with unprecedented activity. Construction crews worked throughout the executive floor, removing walls and glass partitions that had previously segregated leadership from support staff. The redesign initiated after Morgan had spent a day observing how information flowed through the building, aimed to create what he now called visibility channels between departments that had operated in isolation for decades. In the temporary command center established on the 60th floor, Victor Torres sat with the heads of physical and digital security, reviewing comprehensive protocols that integrated human observation with technological systems. The veterans' insights had revolutionized Blake Tech's approach to security, emphasizing that technology alone couldn't replace human intuition and observation. The camera blind spot near the executive elevator has been addressed, reported Sandra Chun, newly appointed Chief of Security Operations. But more importantly, we've implemented Victor's suggestion for rotating security staff through different zones to prevent pattern recognition by potential infiltrators. Morgan nodded approvingly. The security overhaul represented more than procedural changes. It embodied a philosophical shift in how Blake Tech valued different types of knowledge. Victor's practical experience now carried equal weight to the theoretical expertise of security consultants with prestigious credentials, but limited field experience. The maintenance staff report increased suspicious activity awareness, Victor added, his voice steady and confident in this new role. Though he had maintained his regular maintenance position, he now spent Tuesday and Thursday mornings as a security consultant, his schedule adjusted to accommodate his medical treatments. They're using the new reporting app to flag concerns without fear of overstepping boundaries. After the meeting, Morgan walked with Victor toward the elevator banks. The billionaire's typical hurried stride had slowed in recent weeks, his attention more present in each interaction rather than perpetually focused on the next appointment. Your daughter's visiting this weekend? Morgan asked, recalling details from their previous conversation. Victor nodded, the subtle softening around his eyes betraying his anticipation. Sophia and the grandkids are flying in tomorrow. First visit in almost 2 years. The company apartment on Central Park South is available, Morgan offered. Much more space for a family visit than your current place. Victor's expression remained neutral, but his response was firm. Thank you, but we've already arranged everything. They're staying with me. I want them to see my life as it is, not a borrowed version. Morgan accepted the gentle rejection with newfound understanding. Victor's dignity had never derived from external validations, but from internal consistency, a quality Morgan had only recently begun to truly value. Of course, Morgan nodded. Though I hope you'll all join James and me for dinner Sunday. He's eager to discuss the new Veterans Family Scholarship program with Sophia. Her feedback from a recipient's perspective would be invaluable. In the weeks following the security breach, the relationship between James and Morgan had undergone its own remarkable transformation. Their decades-long pattern of mutual disappointment had gradually yielded to cautious collaboration. Initially focused on restructuring the foundation, but increasingly extending to company operations as well. James had moved back to New York from his self-imposed exile in Seattle, taking temporary residence in the family penthouse while searching for his own place. Each evening, father and son shared dinner, sometimes discussing foundation initiatives, sometimes reminiscing about Margaret, sometimes simply existing in companionable silence that would have been impossible months earlier. Later that afternoon, James met his father in the newly renovated Blake Tech cafeteria, a space previously segregated by subtle architectural cues that had kept executives separate from support staff. The redesigned space featured communal tables and a single service line, where department heads and maintenance workers now stood shoulder to shoulder. The board's reaction was mixed, James reported, sliding into the seat across from Morgan. Half of them think your organizational transparency initiative is revolutionary corporate leadership. The other half suspect you're having some kind of delayed midlife crisis. Morgan smiled slightly, selecting a sandwich from the same options available to every employee, another symbolic change he'd implemented. And what do you think? I think Mom would be proud, James replied simply. And surprised. Morgan glanced around the cafeteria, observing the subtle shifts in interaction patterns as hierarchical barriers dissolved. I keep thinking about something Victor said that first morning about commanders knowing the people who protect them. I've spent 20 years building walls between functional areas, creating efficiencies through specialization, never realizing what was lost in the process. Information, James suggested. The kind that doesn't fit neatly into reports and metrics. And humanity, Morgan added quietly. The recognition that systems are ultimately about people, not processes. Their conversation paused as Victor entered the cafeteria with his maintenance team, the group selecting their lunch options before settling at a nearby table. Morgan observed how seamlessly Victor moved between worlds respected by executives for his strategic insights while maintaining authentic connections with his maintenance colleagues. That evening, Morgan sat alone in his penthouse office reviewing the latest draft of his revised will. The document now included not only provisions for James and the restructured charitable foundation, but also a dedicated healthcare trust for Blake Tech's veteran employees and their families. The Veterans Family Education Program had been formalized, with a permanent endowment, ensuring Sofia Torres would be just the first of many to benefit. As Morgan signed the updated document, he reflected on how close he had come to disaster. Had Victor not intervened, Elisa's modifications would have gradually dismantled everything he had built. The betrayal still stung, but increasingly, Morgan recognized that his own blindness had created the conditions that made such deception possible. The investigation into Elisa's activities had revealed a pattern of increasing isolation in Morgan's leadership style, layers of gatekeepers and protocols that had insulated him from direct contact with most of his organization. She had exploited these gaps brilliantly, positioning herself as the essential conduit through which all information flowed. Morgan placed the signed will in his safe, a sense of peace replacing his usual restless drive. The document no longer represented merely the distribution of assets, but a vision for legacy beyond wealth, the lesson Victor Torres had taught him through simple integrity rather than complex strategy. 3 months after Victor had witnessed Elise altering Morgan's will, the transformation at Blake Tech had extended far beyond security protocols and foundation initiatives. The corporate culture itself had undergone a fundamental shift, with transparency and cross-functional collaboration, replacing the rigid hierarchies that had previously defined the organization. On a crisp autumn morning, Morgan stood at the podium in Blake Tech's main auditorium, facing an unusual gathering. Unlike typical corporate assemblies segregated by department and rank, today's audience included representatives from every level of the organization, executives seated alongside maintenance staff, developers next to security personnel, all equal participants in this unprecedented company-wide address. For 20 years, Morgan began, his voice carrying the new warmth that surprised longtime employees. I've measured success through metrics: market share, profit margin, stock performance. Those numbers told a compelling story of corporate achievement, but they obscured a more important narrative about who we are as an organization and what we truly value. From his seat in the third row, Victor observed the man he had come to know beyond the billionaire persona, a leader genuinely grappling with the limitations of his previous worldview. Beside Victor sat Sophia, who had extended her visit after witnessing the remarkable changes unfolding at Blake Tech. Her expertise in educational psychology had proven unexpectedly valuable to the veterans' family education program, leading to a consultant role that allowed her to contribute while remaining based in California. Today, I'm announcing 3 initiatives that represent Blake Tech's evolving priorities, Morgan continued. First, our security structure has been completely redesigned under the guidance of our new Security Advisory Council, which includes voices from every department and level of our organization. Heads turned toward Victor, whose contribution to this transformation was widely known throughout the company. The veteran acknowledged the recognition with a modest nod, uncomfortable with attention, but proud of the systems now in place, systems that valued human observation alongside technological solutions. Second, effective immediately, Blake Tech is implementing the most comprehensive veteran support program in the technology sector. This includes enhanced medical coverage for service-connected conditions, educational benefits for veterans and their families, and dedicated career advancement pathways that recognize military experience as valuable professional training. Morgan paused, his gaze finding James at the back of the auditorium. The months of collaborative work had healed wounds between father and son that both had believed permanent. James now split his time between the Foundation and Blake Tech's new social impact division, bringing his humanitarian vision into the corporate structure rather than opposing it from outside. Finally, Morgan said, his voice softening slightly, I am establishing the Margaret Blake Compassionate Leadership Institute within our organization. This program will ensure that as we continue to innovate technologically, we maintain focus on the human element that ultimately determines true success. The announcement carried special significance for those who remembered Margaret's influence during Blake Tech's early years, her insistence that technological advancement should serve human needs rather than define them. Her philosophy, once sidelined in pursuit of rapid growth, was being reintegrated into the company's fundamental identity. As the presentation concluded and employees dispersed to afternoon responsibilities, Morgan found himself in a quiet moment with Victor and Sophia near the auditorium exit. Your announcement today will change lives, Sophia said, professional assessment mixing with personal appreciation. Especially the education benefits. You've created pathways that simply didn't exist before. Morgan shook his head slightly. I provided resources. You and James designed the pathways. He turned to Victor. And none of it would have happened without your integrity that morning. Victor, uncomfortable as always with praise, redirected the conversation. Have you heard anything about Ms. Winters? The question momentarily darkened Morgan's expression. The investigation into Elise's activities had revealed layers of deception, extending back years: corporate espionage, financial manipulation, and strategic undermining of relationships Morgan valued. Criminal charges were pending, with corporate security cooperating fully with federal investigators. She's negotiating a plea agreement, Morgan replied. The evidence was overwhelming once we knew where to look. Sophia studied the billionaire with professional interest. Does her betrayal still bother you? Morgan considered the question with uncharacteristic openness, not the way it once did. I've come to see that I created the conditions that made her deception possible. My isolation, my delegation of personal responsibilities, my assumption that loyalty could be purchased rather than earned. These were failures of leadership, not just security. The insight reflected Morgan's evolving perspective, less focused on assigning blame than understanding systems that either encouraged integrity or enabled deception. This philosophical shift had rippled throughout Blake Tech's operations, creating an organization increasingly resistant to the very vulnerabilities Elise had exploited. Later that evening, Morgan sat with James in the penthouse living room, reviewing foundation applications from veterans seeking educational support. The work was detailed and sometimes emotionally demanding, but both men had discovered unexpected fulfillment in direct engagement with those they hoped to serve. Sophia's evaluation framework is transforming our selection process, James observed, referring to the assessment model Victor's daughter had developed. We're identifying candidates who might have been overlooked in our previous approach. Morgan nodded, still sometimes surprised by his son's insightful perspectives. She has her father's ability to see systems holistically, while never losing sight of individual impact. The comparison between Sophia and Victor, a natural acknowledgement of inherited strengths, represented perhaps the most profound shift in Morgan's worldview. Where he had once valued people primarily for their function within his corporate machine, he now recognized the complex humanity that transcended organizational roles. As father and son continued their work into the evening, their collaborative rhythm reflected the broader transformation unfolding throughout Blake Tech, a recognition that true security, innovation, and success flowed not from rigid hierarchies, but from genuine connection across artificial boundaries. 1 year after the morning that changed everything at Blake Tech, a small gathering assembled on the rooftop garden of Titan Tower. Unlike the company's typically elaborate corporate events, this celebration was intentionally intimate. Morgan and James Blake, Victor Torres and his family, and a select group of individuals whose lives had been transformed by the changes Victor's integrity had inspired. The garden itself represented the physical manifestation of Blake Tech's evolution. Once a sterile executive retreat, it had been redesigned as a therapeutic space for veterans receiving treatment through the company's healthcare initiatives. Medicinal plants and wheelchair-accessible pathways now replaced the manicured but unused luxury that had previously occupied the space. Morgan stood near the edge of the garden, watching as Victor's grandchildren explored the butterfly sanctuary with the unrestrained joy only children can express. Nearby, Sophia conversed with the program directors of the Veterans Family Education Program, which had already supported over 200 families in its first year of operation. Hard to believe it's been a year, James said, joining his father at the railing. Morgan nodded, his gaze traveling from the garden to the city beyond. I was just thinking about how close we came to a very different outcome. The legal proceedings against Elise Winters had concluded 3 months earlier with a negotiated plea agreement. The evidence against her had been overwhelming once investigators understood what to look for: electronic trails of document manipulation, communications with competitors, systematic undermining of Blake